So this is a panel that we will be... Yes. This is a panel that will be looking at some of the models we've seen that have been out there already, as well as some of the ways we can build political will. We're going to do a very discussion-oriented format, and so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to say a little bit about their background and project. I'm going to remind people that we will be taking questions on index cards. How are they getting their index cards, Kat? They're in the folder. So if you don't have a folder, there's folders up there. You have index cards. Please feel free to write down a question and then wave it around. Hold it up. We'll have someone grab it, and then we'll get those questions asked of our panelists. And then a note for the panelists, please make sure your mic is glowing red and you are speaking in the close vicinity of it, please. And so with that, we're going to start by asking Carole Monroe, sitting next to me here, the general manager of ECFiber up in Vermont and the CEO of ValleyNet, what those things are, what they do briefly, and then we'll be getting into the discussion after each person has some background.
So ECFiber is East Central Vermont Telecommunications District. And what makes that unique is that it's an organizational structure in Vermont called a Communications Union District. And I would say that organizational structure is important as municipalities look to build out in any way or partner with others. It's a structure, in this particular case, it's a structure that's recognized by the bond markets. It's like a sewer district or a water district. And so that's an important place to be. It's only existed in Vermont since 2015. Prior to that, ECFiber was just a group of towns connected with interladder contracts between them. In addition to that, what the next thing that makes it unique is it started with crowdfunding. So basically, 3 private investors contributed their investments, contributed enough money to build out a 12-mile network prototype in one of the small towns. That worked so well that everybody on the 12 miles, plus everybody off the 12 miles, wanted service, and then continued offering promissory notes for private investment into this area at $2,500 increments, and continued to build in those areas where people invested. They raised $7.5 million in that way, built out about 300 miles of network. The second is that, so ValleyNet comes into this because ValleyNet is the operations construction company for ECFiber. ECFiber does not have any employees. All of the work is done by ValleyNet. And so it's a great public-private partnership there. The bond market liked that. They didn't like the district to have employees. They liked the district not to have employees because of all sorts of HR, funding, 401k issues, and so on. So that was good for us. So after the $7.5 million, by 2015, this organization had about 1,200 customers, about 200 to 300 miles of fiber, about 258, I guess, miles of fiber on the ground, and was EBITDA positive and cash flow positive, 3 years of audited financials. I say that because that was what was incredibly important for the revenue bond market. It's considered a municipality. The district is considered a municipality in the state of Vermont. So the way that funds are raised today is through revenue bonds. The first year of revenue bonds, we paid back half of those initial investors. Some were a little upset because they were getting great interest rates, but they got paid back. And then and we built 250 miles of fiber network. The second year of the revenue bonds, we paid back the other half of those investors and enough money to build the next 250 miles. And we've gone through 3 rounds of revenue bonds for another 250 miles of network. We think we have about 2 more years of going to the bond market, and it will be a total debt service of about $48 million to build out about 1,450 miles, so 1,450 miles of network total. It's been an incredible experience. We're now at about 3,000 customers, 3,100 and something as of today. We have about 700 miles of network built and lit, and more coming on board by the end of the year and into next year. The mission calls for us to serve the unserved areas first. So in our world, that's defined as anybody who doesn't have cable access for broadband. And so it's moving forward quite well. And we just continue to move it ahead and move it forward. And as long as the market stays stable, it'll be a good deal.
Thank you. It's a wonderful panel. I meant to do this before Carole started, but each of these panelists is close to my heart for different reasons. The ECFiber project is a reminder that, when some people are sitting there thinking, oh, we can't do anything unless the states help us or the federal government or we need someone else to come in, the folks at ECFiber, Carole came after helping out a different project in New Hampshire for a while, the Fast Roads project, but ECFiber came and just started building and developed a model to start small and to demonstrate success and build on it. It's a tremendous success story that has not had enough national coverage that it deserves. The second panelist that we're going to have introduce, in this case himself, Fletcher Kittredge, is the founder and CEO of GWI in Maine. If you're not familiar with him, Fletcher isn't just a unique individual. He's the type of person that has made the internet possible. His enthusiasm and love for the internet goes far beyond the ability of just his ISP to extract profits from it. He's someone who cares deeply about the internet's success, and I'm very thankful for that. Please go ahead, Fletcher.
Okay, so I am CEO of GWI. GWI has been around for about 25 years. And what's important about us in this space is that we build and operate fiber networks, and we are absolutely agnostic about who owns those networks as long as they're open access networks. And I'll describe what open access is later. But basically, open access is a way to get around the one big pipe for everyone that one of the mayors was talking about. So that's GWI, but I want to talk about two other roles I have. One is as a founder of the Maine Broadband Coalition, and the other is I'm lucky enough to be on Carole Monroe's board over at ValleyNet. And it's been really wonderful to work with her, and she's actually retiring, which means that there are two opportunities. First is I think she might be doing some consulting, and I think she's amazing at it. And the second is we're looking for a new general manager, and it's a really, really cool project, and the future of that project is very bright because the enormous cash flow engine is starting to really spin up. And all of these projects ultimately generate enormous amounts of cash flow if you can just get them spin up. So the next person who takes this role is really going to have a unique position. So Maine Broadband Coalition. One of the key things that you'd want to ask me is why is Maine done so much? And I would say we've gotten so much done because we have so little, and so we have to. We are forced into a situation of self-reliance, which just matches the rural nature and the ocean nature of who we are. And the Maine Broadband Coalition is an entirely grassroots organization of the people who felt a burning need to have superior broadband in their communities. And it has gotten an enormous amount done. And the problems, I got the sense that this was all really complicated in the prior discussion. It isn't actually. Compared to most of the stuff people deal with, this stuff is really simple, both financially and technically. It's just new to you. But we've gotten a lot of the problems that the prior panelists talk about are solved problems in our state. Driven by the Maine Broadband Coalition. We have broadband utility districts, which means a set of towns, municipalities, because no municipality should ever do this by themselves, makes no sense, can band together file to be a broadband district, and they have the right to attach to the poles and do all that. On the pole attachments, we had some of the same problems that other states have.
Let's leave pole
Okay.
attachments for
Later.
Q&A.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. We fixed that problem. We've gotten off into areas like healthcare, getting telehealth reimbursement taken care of in the state, which is a huge boon, and many other problems. So right now where I am, and we have worked with some really neat municipal projects, some of which are owned by the town, some of which we own, but we've made contracts with the town that commit us to certain behavior in the long term, forever, basically, that would stop us from being a monopoly, and other things like that. And my interest now has actually turned to all the different ways that municipal broadband projects and open access projects can go wrong. And I'm working on a catalog of problems and solutions right now. I hope to have done fairly soon. And there's another document that I wrote about 5 years ago called a roadmap for municipalities. And actually, I just found out some people are looking to update that. So we don't have slides, but afterwards, if there's a way to pass the information around, I'll pass out the links to those things.
Great. One of the reasons I like to butter up Fletcher is he's the person I'm most likely to interrupt over the course of our panel, as Fletcher knows from past
As well I should be.
Our third panelist is Jessica Fowler, a Selectwoman from Sharon, Connecticut. And I deeply appreciate anyone who stands for elected office, admits to not being particularly technological, and then sits between these two folks who have such deep experience. So it takes real courage, and we're going to deeply benefit from you being here as we talk about some of the political will issues that come with these projects.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm here representing the small town voice in this whole initiative, and also here to talk about another component too, along with getting fiber in your communities, and that's the cell phone component. So I'm the Selectman of Sharon, Connecticut. We're a very small town in Northwest Connecticut, and I've been there since 2013. In terms of being a selectman, I grew up in Cornwall, so I really know the area quite well. And probably about, let's say at this point, 4 years ago, we had our current rep to the state legislature call me and say, "Get down here, I need you. There's something called this gig network, and they want to do it, and we're not going to be able to be represented because we're so small, but we need somebody at the table." So I came down, and that was that. It just took off. But I think for us, one of the things that we were hoping to do, in addition to having a network like this in our towns that would help tremendously with community and economic development. I mean, if you look at the 21 towns, and especially probably 9 or 10 of those towns, our average age is 58. This is a problem. I'm 52 and I'm considered a youngster, so it's a large, large issue for us. And it's not getting any better. And our schools, the enrollment is just dive bombing. That's a huge concern for us because costs go up. We're expected to share the burden of those educational costs, and we don't have any kids. So that's another issue. So I think that we, as 21 towns, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, and I'll shut up in a second so we can get into some good questions. But when I started looking at this issue, I knew there were other people in my neighboring towns that felt the same way that I did, that, you know, we had community and economic development challenges, we had cell phone dead zones all over the gosh darn place, and these two could be married, these two issues. Of course, we know that enhanced cellular could use fiber as a backhaul and as the backbone for the whole network. So what were we gonna do? What would be our next step? And one of the ways that we've had a lot of success in something that I think we probably should talk a little bit about today, and the current panel was talking about, you know, how do we get our communities together? And I think the way that we do this is through our Council of Governments. we don't have county government anymore, and which I personally think is a shame, but we do have these terrific council of governments, and that's where we got a lot of our support, is from our council of governments. Our council of governments helped us get a regional performance incentive grant for $200,000. That was tremendously helpful in helping us get started, getting a project coordinator, reaching out to our muni leaders. There had to be a ton of education done. Nobody knew what we were talking about. We barely knew what we were talking about. We just knew it was something we had to have get done. So I'm hoping today, by being here, I can talk a little bit about how to build those partnerships. And hopefully we can touch a little bit on the importance of looking beyond your towns and thinking about doing this on a statewide level. I personally think that's where this whole conversation should be going. Because when you look at it from a statewide perspective, those costs per home go way down. And I think that's where we should be talking. So I'll shut up now. Thank you.
And it occurs to me that I'm not sufficiently famous that all of you know who I am. I'm Chris Mitchell. I spent a chunk of my time doing the policy director role for Next Century Cities. The rest of my time I spend with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, where I run a team that does a lot of reporting on what local governments are doing around the country. I run the Community Broadband Bits podcast, which several people here have been on. It's the best show for about a 20 to 30 minute interview on local government broadband policy as you're going to find. So highly recommend checking that out. We have transcripts for everything to make sure it's accessible. As a reminder, please ask questions on the index cards in the folders. When you have a question, wave it around. I may get increasingly provocative if there are not questions coming in. And I think I'll start off that way a little bit as we talk about, I want to start by talking a little bit about lessons learned regarding middle mile, last mile, and that'll transition into pole attachment a little bit as well. But Carole, I wanted to start with you because I think Vermont has learned some interesting lessons in terms of how you design the middle mile, the sort of arterial fiber that goes around the state to make sure it's maximally useful for local improvements. And I would just set this up by saying I think Massachusetts did it poorly. And I'll leave that for potentially future exploration if anyone wants to ask why in a question. But what did Vermont learn and do right that others should be learning from?
So I would agree that Vermont did something unique, and Massachusetts isn't the only state that may not have done it in this way. But Vermont had a group called the Vermont Telecommunications Authority, and they had some funding to build some middle mile infrastructure across Vermont. And what they did is they built out a fairly robust 144 count fiber, 288 in some cases, in areas of Vermont that you would hardly expect fiber to be there. And in so doing, though, they also made sure that that fiber could be used not only for middle mile, but for distribution. And that's an important piece because in most states, the middle mile was built to be middle mile, to get from town to town, not to drop to every household, every business, every premise along that same path. And in this case, this fiber is built directly to do that. So the ECFiber network has 48 strands of that 144 or 288 fiber, and we use it as middle mile, and we use it to drop to every customer along the route. And it's been powerful because these, as I said, these links were not built through the really densely populated areas. They take some roads that I wonder if they're really roads anymore, but some very back roads, some very dirt roads this fiber travels over, and it really reaches deep into the rural areas of our network. It's allowed us then to build off of that into the rest of those towns. So you have a small town like Pittsfield, Vermont, in the Green Mountains, and it has fiber to every premise. It's a completely complete town that we've done, and it's amazing because it's very rural, and it's encouraged businesses and economic development, and mostly people who work from home.
And I'd like to jump to Fletcher. One of the hats you didn't mention was the three-ring binder project in Maine. What did that do right in terms of middle mile? I think your mic is off.
What it did right was that it was open access, and that portion of it has been incredibly powerful. We built lots and lots of fiber into it, and it's used by over 3 dozen different companies now. So there's an enormous amount of competition in some areas. Can I answer what it did wrong?
Yes, please.
Okay. There are 2 things that did wrong. The first was it was a public-private partnership, which had the classic failing of public-private partnerships, which is the public side doesn't do a good job of keeping track of what the private's doing. And every time you do a public-private partnership, the private, one definition of nanosecond is the time from when it's signed to when the private people try to bend the thing to maximize their profit.
And as a
So,
reminder, you're often the private side of a public-private
yeah,
partnership.
oh yeah.
So
yeah,
this is
yeah,
not someone who's
yeah,
just
yeah.
completely.
And
gives some
that's
perspective.
why transparency of interests. The first thing we do is explain how we expect to make money. So on the private side, I'll tell you, public-private partnerships, the public has to. And what that led to is, even though it was specified that it be done the way that Carole just described, in Maine, the private side built it in such a way it was only middle mile. And so it goes past tens of thousands of households that can't get service from it because the off-ramp was not built.
And so one of the interesting points about both of those states is that they built extensive networks on existing poles. Here in Connecticut, you have possibly the best tool in the nation for doing such things, and yet there's some challenges. We're not going to spoil everything because the next presentation is going to give us an update, but I did want to ask Jessica to give us a quick overview and set the stage for what's happening with the GAIN.
Well, I'll do my best. So the Town of Sharon, OCC, Council of Small Towns, and Connecticut Conference of Municipalities has brought a suit against PURA for their recent decision.
And PURA
go ahead,
is...
please. Oh, Public Utility Regulatory Agency, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So this just all happened in the past 9 to 12 months, and there are some arguments on that are a little different, and we've had some good coordination of efforts in terms of pushing back against the PURA decision, so that these different parties are making different arguments against the restrictions that PURA believes that they can do against in terms of prohibiting us from using that line on the pole. I will say this, not being able to use a space on the pole is going to be very prohibitive for us. As we look towards models that we can afford just in the 21 towns or even for 9 towns, it really does depend on whether or not we can have that access. But I don't want to, Joe Rosenthal is here and he will tell you much, much more than me.
So let's roll into a little bit more on the pole attachment issue. And as a reminder, please just wave your questions around. I see that Bob has the first question here. We have another question over here, so someone will be around to collect those. But what is happening with pole attachments in Maine in terms of making sure that, give him the cat and Deb, please. In terms of making sure that everyone's able to access the poles so we have the kind of investment we need?
Well, the first thing that happened in Maine is you have a aroused, I keep bees, an aroused populace that is angry. And that aroused populace led to a law being passed at the state legislature directing this Maine PUC to come up with a set of pole attachment rules that promoted broadband against, among other things. And one of the things it did is it made it very clear that municipalities could attach to a pole. Did not, and it's still being argued over whether or not they get special rights, which means they could attach to the poles for free, but they can certainly attach to the poles. The other thing is they required the pole owners to do things that massively lowers the cost of make-ready, which helps offset potentially if municipalities don't get subsidized access to the poles, attaching will be a lot cheaper. The other thing they did is they required firm limits. There are 2 things that you run into with attaching to poles. One is it costs a lot, and two is it takes really a long time. And time is really money in this, if you look at the financials of any of these things. And they said basically you're required to do work within these intervals, and if you don't do the work within the intervals, gives the attacher the right to do the work and send you the bill. So
I think that's a very good start. One of the things I'd like to suggest, and I welcome anyone to contradict me, but whether you're dealing with new entrants or incumbents, dealing with polls is challenging in part because of unpredictability. And something local governments should be striving to do is to have some predictability around right-of-way permitting. It's less important, I think, whether you get your permits done in 15 days or 3 months as it being predictable and common. It's really challenging to have crews as a ISP, whether you're an incumbent or a competitor, that you don't know if they're going to be busy next week or not because you don't know when the permit's going to go through. So I think that's something that has been missed and is something that can be resolved, is just having some regularity to how fast local government's part of this process can be.
And I'd like to add to that Vermont doesn't have quite what Maine has in terms of pole attachment rules, and it is a tremendous issue because, primarily because of the timing. So, they're supposed to have that work done within a 6-month period of time. So you contract out for a 250-mile build. You think you're going to have your pole attachments. Actually, you really don't think it, but you're supposed to have your pole attachments within a 6-month period of time. You've hired a contractor. He's going to start on X date and continue until the 250 miles are built. Well, that doesn't happen because of rain, sleet, snow. I mean, whatever excuse you can possibly give. In general, our pole attachments have been running anywhere from 6 months to a year delay. So projects that should take a year, it should take us a year to build 250 miles, is taking 18 months or more. On top of that, of course, we've gone to the revenue bond market and acquired these funds in which we're paying interest on that are sitting there because it's not being built. So it really creates a tremendous amount of burden to municipalities trying to do this job. So the more states that can clarify that and keep it straight, or even go, I hate to say it, in the way that the FCC has recommended with one touch make ready, then the better off we'll all be.
I think, Chris, I see a laundry list of things that might be able to be presented to Governor-elect Lamont of how things can get a little bit easier for municipalities around this.
You want to read the question? And did you have your question picked up, sir, over here? Maybe writing another one. Go ahead, Deb.
So we have 2 questions. The first one I'll ask, it sort of matches the conversation. Hopefully with 5G, we won't have a pole problem. How do you see 5G affecting net access and policy?
I'm sorry, that's totally wrong. If you look at 5G, do a Google 5G fiber densification, which is, my undergraduate degree was in English. Oh, what a word. But that's what people are using, fiber densification. To have 5G do what you talk about, you need to run fiber down basically every single road, and antennas need to be within 200 meters of each other. And the antennas need to be fed by fiber. So it's not a way of getting to the last mile, it's a way of getting to the last 100 meters. And you need fiber within 100 meters of you. That's one reason why it may be a solution for Connecticut, but it's not a solution for rural areas. So the term is fiber densification 5G, Google it.
And there's an interesting question related to that, which actually is the mobile component of these. A lot of us are focused on the data services, but I think in Vermont, I'm curious what lessons you've learned about whether you've been able to improve your coverage. And then, Jessica, you'd mentioned the importance of improving that coverage as well. So I think we could both talk about that.
So there are 2 things that have happened in Vermont in the last 7 years. One is during the ARRA funding time period in 2010.
That's a broadband stimulus.
Right. So they provided funds to build what was called a wireless overlay over Vermont. And so the idea there was that it would hit the most rural customers. Well, the reality to that is Vermont is the Green Mountain state. And to do that, to do what it was supposed to do, they would have had to run fiber deep into those communities and put up towers in order to make that work. So it's there. People use it as a second source, sometimes as a primary source in our footprint until we get there, but it's not the be-all and end-all for Vermont. The second thing they tried to do is to increase cellular coverage along the major roads in Vermont, major being anything that's numbered, and probably paved. But
Probably.
So they worked with a company to try and put sort of mini cell towers along that path, with the idea that the roaming rates would offset the costs. So they would get revenue from roaming rates, and it would pay for the cost of this happening. That business model didn't pan out. And the equipment isn't up to snuff, so basically you go from one tower to the other. In order for it to work, you have to stop your car. But it was good for 911 services. So you knew that if you went to the end of your road, you would have some cellular coverage, so you could call 911. And that's really the important aspect of that. It's now on hold. It's been discontinued. The equipment's still on the poles. They're looking for another carrier to pick it up. But it was an important factor for 911, but not for data services at all. So those are the two projects they've done with wireless.
In terms of the mobile, I'm just going to mention a couple of things. One, I think as a community leader, when you're putting together your group, if you already have a group that's interested in looking at this for your municipality, I think it's very important to make sure that emergency services are sitting at your table and are involved. We have someone from Litchfield County Dispatch who is their information specialist with us on our board, and that's been extremely helpful. I have towns in the 21-town region that I'm working with that there is one town in particular where I'm not sure you can place a cell phone call in the whole town. And that's very disturbing to me. I continue to not understand how emergencies can be handled, yet somehow they are, and very well. And that's Warren, Connecticut. Warren has just some tremendous challenges. So when we first started this project, we always knew that if there was any way, and we use the term mobile enhancement because we weren't sure what that meant, but we knew we wanted it to be better. It wasn't going to be 5G. We weren't thinking of that. We just wanted more access. We're in the middle of an assessment, a cable and mobile assessment right now, and actually my consultant is here today, and if you'd like to speak with her, please let me know. But we're right at the tail end of our assessment piece, and what's been really good to have her do and to be able to see are to start looking at some of these maps and seeing exactly where our dead zones are. We sort of know by driving through and, can you make a call or not? But she's been able to take maps from many different sources, not just our siting council maps, and really get a firm idea of where those dead zones, what tax parcels are those dead zones are in town. So I think that data is going to be very helpful for us.
And I wanted to note one other thing, which is that even in areas that you might think of as having good coverage, there's an interesting statistic from the California Public Utilities Commission, I believe it was 2 years ago now, in which they went around the entire state and they did testing and found that only there was not a single part of the state of California where you could get 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up on a mobile connection more than 98% of the time. And so there was no area that had mobile broadband regularly. In that definition, and historically in telecom, we think of reliable as being 99.999. So it's just sort of a matter of keeping things in perspective. These mobile devices are wonderful, but they don't quite serve the same purpose as the networks we've depended on historically. Deb, you have another question?
I do, and this one is for Jessica Fowler. So Sharon, Connecticut is home to the only hospital in the northern part of the state between Poughkeepsie and Hartford. The hospital is owned by a large network with offices in 2 states. What role does it play with regard to Sharon's broadband plans?
That's a really good question. Must be from somebody from that area. I'll find you. I don't know if many of you know, but Sharon Hospital was recently purchased by HealthQuest, and we welcomed that purchase. Sharon Hospital was actually, and I'll try to be as brief as possible before I answer this question. Sharon Hospital was the first and maybe only at this point for-profit hospital in the state of Connecticut. Ellen, is that right? Sharon Hospital? Yeah, okay, thanks. I thought you'd be able to confirm, thank you. And that was because we were in a very desperate place financially and needed to frankly be bailed out. And we had a private company come in and purchase the hospital and run it for a while. Unfortunately, they were not able to create the kind of partnerships that we needed in order to provide the kind of services to people in the Connecticut towns that the hospital served, and also the New York towns, because Sharon's right on the border. So recently we went back to being a not-for-profit hospital by being purchased by HealthQuest, which is a New York-based healthcare organization. They are also looking to expand even more and are going into want to purchase the Western Connecticut healthcare system. We have reached out as an organization. I'm the chair of Northwest Connect, which I should have mentioned before, even though I'm wearing my Sharon hat. I am the chair of Northwest Connect, which is the group that we formed as a board with members from different towns and municipal officials to start looking at broadband and enhanced cellular. We have reached out to Sharon Hospital, and I think that they're in a place right now where they're still trying to get a sense of what this whole merger might mean for them and what it's going to look like. But they are very aware of the challenges of delivering rural health care. One of the things that's happened recently, which has been very difficult for all of us, is that our maternity center went down, and now we're probably looking at not being able to have babies delivered at Sharon Hospital, which means longer commutes for people. So we're very interested in working with HealthQuest once things get settled down for them on how anything that we're doing can help enhance the whole telecommunications effort that's needed in our rural areas, because rural healthcare delivery is failing, not just here, but all across the nation.
I want to jump in and before we get to the next question. And first, let me ask if there's any other questions that are floating around. Make sure we haven't missed you. There's about 30 communities around the nation that have open access networks, and many of them, most of them actually, in what we'd consider non-metro areas. There's a few private companies that prefer the model. Fletcher, you're one of them. You'd mentioned you want to talk a little bit more about open access. Do you want to describe why it's important?
Sure.
And please turn your mic on.
Sorry. Open access is a model where the network is shared. There's two types of it. One is lit open access, where it's shared at what's called the network level. The other is dark fiber, where the fiber bundle is shared. Individual companies get different fibers. I think there are lots of reasons why the dark fiber open access model is superior, though they both have their advantages. And what it means is that you don't have a monopoly. And I think so many of the problems we have now are traced back to there being a monopoly. And I think if you have a municipal network that's not open, what you've said is the municipality is going to have a monopoly, and they'll be a good dictator rather
Right.
than a bad one.
Just to
but
be
you
very
still
clear,
have a dictator.
To be very clear about that, they will have a monopoly on the new infrastructure. The existing providers that were already in town would still be there,
Yeah,
having
but-
a monopoly on their lines. I'm not making a value judgment. I just want to be clear about what we're saying.
And that's true, but the new network will be so much better and do so many different things. They will probably have a monopoly on a network that will do those new applications that everybody needs. And the old networks will die.
So Carole also has experience with open access, coming to ECFiber from the Fast Roads network in New Hampshire. What experiences can you share regarding open access from that experience?
So New Hampshire Fast Roads is a network that was built from about Hanover down to the Mass border. along the western side of the state, primarily middle mile. Two last mile projects were in place as well. And it is open access. I think it continues to remain open access. The difficulty is that it is very rural, and to find residential providers on an open access network where it's very rural, so that means the density isn't there and the number of premises passed isn't there as well, was very difficult. And we ended up with primarily one residential provider. We ended up with about 7 people who were interested in the community anchor institutions that we connected, as well as all the businesses along the path. So they were interested in the commercial activity. We just really couldn't attract more than one. Now, residential is very different than business. Most businesses have an IT person or an IT company that they deal with, and so you're working one-on-one for support calls. On residential, you're working one-on-one with every customer from the age of 80 down to 5. And you need to be able to answer those questions, often not network related, more likely computer related, very patiently and kindly, and direct them in what they need to do. But it's an intensely time-consuming effort. And that's the reason why many CLECs don't want to get into the business of residential, because it is a conundrum of how you do that. I mean, ECFiber has 3,000 customers, and we have three customer support representatives, and they are busy all of the time. And that doesn't include the ones that have to go out in the field and work with customers one-on-one at their homes. So it can be very time-consuming in that process. So, open access is great. The Vermont VTA miles that were built is open access, where we have 48 strands. I know that the existing telecom uses it for middle mile access. That Vermont overlay of fiber access, cellular type of access, it also uses that fiber. So it is open access, and and those companies are using it as well as us.
Do you think that would change significantly if, for instance, the model of 3-ring binder expanded more significantly and a provider could touch thousands of subscribers in each state? I mean, this is the model that Stamford's mayor was just discussing. I have to think that if you had a common network that served a lot of New Hampshire, areas of Maine, and then also particularly if it touched like West Haven, we've touched New Haven, and Stamford and Hartford. I mean, it's just...
Yes.
Yeah, I would say open access. Don't go alone, and particularly not in the woods. So you do not want to do it. One small community trying to do it. I'm not talking about Fast Roads. And Fast Roads, it was a wonderful project, and we learned. Everybody learned a lot from it. But one of the things is, if you're going to do open access, you need to do it in scale. If you're going to attract the ISPs. The ISPs don't like it because they'd really prefer to have a monopoly. So you got to have enough customers for them to get over their disgruntlement about not having a monopoly.
So Fletcher just tripped a tripwire that I like to watch out for, which is he means the large incumbent ISPs, I think, typically.
Yeah, even you had small, I mean, we're doing it in Maine, and even the small guys, if you can't bring them, I think the 10,000 passings, they look at it. They're going to get a fractional market share because it's a monopoly. And so if I only get 10%, that means I'm only going to have 1,000 customers. Is it really worth it? And and at 1,000 customers, even for little guys, the answer I think is yes. But and you can ameliorate this by having both dark fiber and lit services. It's much easier for the small guys to start with lit services and then transition to dark.
And just as we wrap up open access, I think my understanding is that this is the dream for at least some in the Northwest Connect approach.
Oh, definitely. I know that all I can think about is right now, while you're speaking about open access, and fiber is the assessment that we're in right now, and just understanding exactly what you have in your communities. And I was asked a couple months ago, I was talking about doing this assessment and having someone do it for us, and this person said to me, "My God, that sounds so expensive. Why the heck would you want to do it? Won't engineers come in and do this for you?" And I said, "Yes, but you want to make sure you understand exactly what you have in your communities before somebody else comes in and tells you what you have." Right?
Yes. Carole and I were just talking about this, and how many towns are making bad procurement choices. It's something Connecticut probably doesn't struggle with, but we got these little towns that have never done anything on this, and they're trying to shortcut the process, and that almost always ends in tears. And they can end up wasting a lot of money they don't have if you don't do exactly what you described, because the public side has to watch out for its interests in all these public-private partnerships.
Right, and I'll just add to that in addition to finding out what your infrastructure is, we're also able to look at what are the subscriber rates for what we have right now. What does that tell us about the business model that we need to develop moving forward? How do we attract people? How do we make our product the best that it can be so that it reaches everybody in the 21 towns and is seen as something competitive?
I just wanted to put a final note on that, because a point I always like to make is that this is expensive when we're talking about fiber to the home. It is the most expensive broadband solution. It's a fraction of the cost of water. It's much cheaper than electricity. And if you want to know what's really expensive for a small town, it's losing population year after year.
And a sewer system.
Yeah, the sewer system. This is just, these sorts of things have to be kept in perspective. And if you're thinking about it as a private sector investment, it is extremely large. As a public sector infrastructure, it's actually remarkably low cost.
Okay. The mayor of East Hartford said the model the town is using required little or no public investment. Towns are unwilling to invest much, if anything. What models are available that work in this regard? The other comment made with this question is that the trenching seems to work around the public utilities decision as a comment, but the question is really about what models.
Terrific.
Here's the thing about this, is people pay for broadband. These, except in the most rural areas, which, how many people does Sharon have? What's the population?
2,500, Jocelyn?
Okay, so that's
23.
23. That's okay. That's rural. But except in the most rural areas, they're self-supporting. That's what's interesting. So if you look at the ECFiber, those 24 towns, are any of them have a population of 2,500?
There are two, which we have put to be last because they have a lot of cable in them.
Yeah. So
Hartford and
right.
Montpelier.
I mean, these are towns that so rural cable couldn't make it work. But the business model works because subscriber fees cover the costs of building the system. There are no subsidies in the ECFiber model. The regional, what we have in Maine and Vermont, is a regional broadband utility. One of the things Carole didn't mention is really important. Those 24 towns, they don't back this at all. They're full. That says right on the bonds, right up at the top, the faith and credit of these bonds are not backed by the towns, only backed by the revenues. What made ECFiber work, and what's hard to duplicate, and this is what you might concentrate on, is getting the initial $5 million to spin the thing up. And once you do that, you generate enough cash, and it's really easy to move on from there. A day will come when enough of these are done that the bond market will lend you the first $5 million too. They want to see an entity that's got a little bit of money in the bank and the employees it needs, and to spin up. But these things pay for themselves, essentially, except in the most rural areas.
So just a quick note, I'm going to talk about a model in the funding panel at the end of the day. And we have a really great question, but I wanted to ask if there's any other models. And I also wanted to say that if you want to learn a lot more about ECFiber, one of the things we've done at muninetworks.org is tag everything. So you can search for it, and once you've found one story on something, whether you click on Vermont or ECFiber specifically, you can find 10, 15 stories detailing the history of the project.
I do think it's important, though, to remember that if you're East Hartford and you have, I can't remember the exact population of the premises, but 52,000, something like that, that's a far cry from 800 in Pittsfield, right? So in our district, we have a total of about 28,000 premises. And much of those premises, well, a good 300 of them are in, 3,000 of them are in those two cities that I mentioned. The rest of that population is very spread out over the towns. But you need to bring towns together to get some sort of density and some sort of, cost sharing. These towns don't contribute anything to the bottom line, yet when we are done and the revenues are really flowing, then the towns need to decide what we're going to do with that. And all this excess money, and that's true, and we can project that out. And so one of the things they're looking at is dropping the costs so that everybody has access, or just subsidizing the access for children on school lunch programs and the elderly who have special tax benefits, and across the board, so that everyone can have access in a great way.
Yes, this one's for you. What did Massachusetts do wrong in its middle mile build out? And what should Massachusetts do now with its middle mile assets? I know you'd like that one.
Oh, I do like that one. I'd be curious if, because I believe Fletcher had a comment as well about that.
Well, I'll tell you what I think they did wrong. I think they duplicated the mistake of the three-ring binder and did not do what Vermont did, which is they did not, even though they could have, they made it hard to connect up things. And they have hundreds of miles of middle mile fiber passing tens of thousands of businesses and residents that can't use it. And actually what they could do is they could go back and overlash at a fraction of the cost, because there's no make ready and the strand's already up, and redo it. And that's going to cost money, but and it's too bad because it's wasted. They could have done it right the first time, but it's still a lot cheaper than ignoring the problem.
And as I said before, it's not just Massachusetts. New Hampshire, through the stimulus package funds, built 770 miles of network throughout New Hampshire, all middle mile. You can't do distribution off of it, except in certain sections of the Fast Roads network, which is attached to that. So it was very common to do that. It's clearly sort of a mistake you can see now in hindsight.
Would you like to say anything bad about Massachusetts?
Only that everyone approaches me and says, oh, I hear they're doing wonderful things up in Massachusetts. And all I can say is they are completely different towns than we are. And many of them had actually an advantage of not having anything like Maine.
Yeah.
So that's a very different animal than what we're dealing with. But as my neighbors, I wish them all the best.
So people who know me know that I'm a big Philadelphia Eagles fan, having grown up in the eastern Pennsylvania area. So let me say some nice things about Massachusetts, since they allowed us to finally win a Super Bowl. Massachusetts spent a lot of money on broadband to try to improve access in rural areas, something almost very few other states have done. To the extent that other states have committed resources, often for larger populations, they've committed a fraction of that. So Massachusetts really tried to do something well. Now, what I think they did wrong was they went to a number of consultants that probably had not been to Western Massachusetts and had not built a broadband network before, and they asked them to solve the problem with a lot of money. And they ended up spending more than $100 million without actually bringing any residents or businesses online. They did connect a lot of anchor institutions. And so this is not a matter of saying they did it all wrong. They did it in a way that I would have done differently. I think they missed some opportunities. What they are doing now, I think, is far more effective. They've given lump sums to local governments to expand access in ways that they see fit. I think many of those local governments are making smart decisions. I think some of them are squandering it. This is the trade-off, is that you have to be willing to let, in my view of the world, to let some local governments make bad decisions and figure out what you're going to do with it. But I think the result is going to be more positive now that more money is going into local decision-making where they know the problem better and they can pick individual solutions. And often they're working together on them, but they can individually decide their best options. Do we have one more question we want to squeeze in, Deb? So let me ask if there's final comments here. We are going to be, at the end of this session, bringing up Bill to introduce Joe, and we will be going to lunch shortly thereafter. Final comments?
Telephone poles or utility poles are the classic public-private partnership. The public gives the private companies the real estate to put the poles in the public right-of-way, and they did that originally because it was supposed to be in the public benefit. And if you can't get your population angry enough about the situation, so they go to the private side of the public-private partnership, either fix it or take these things down, then I can't help you.
I'll just say that I think the public-private partnership starts when you develop your board and your people that are going to start working on this with you. Because you don't want just municipal leaders, you need private sector, you need your nonprofits, you need your healthcare, you need your agriculture for us, you need your rural innovators, you need your tech people. You know your communities best, you know who will be affected by this. They need to be sitting there. And don't forget your emergency services. Your partnerships start there with everyone in your community.
And I would just add that it also starts at the state level, where you need to remove any barriers to having this work in any way. So in many states, you can't bond for broadband. In New Hampshire, you can't bond for broadband in areas they consider to be served. Now, frankly, I think that's a local decision. What's served in one community is not served in another. But it has to be at least the 25.3 federal definition. But it's a conundrum. Who decides that? You know, is DSL serving at 25.3 or not? I mean, there are real questions there, and that's a barrier to bonding in New Hampshire. And in New Hampshire, they don't have, I come from New Hampshire, but they don't have a structure like a communication union district or a lighting district, which is what Massachusetts has, or the districts that Fletcher talked about in Maine. So there has to be a structure identified that you can develop a telephone or broadband district around. I think those are all very important types of things, and they start at the state level. What does that look like at the state level? Removing all barriers and making those pole attachment tariffs solid with repercussions if the existing carriers don't perform. So there are lots of things that can be done at the state level that would make things easier at the municipal level.
I'd like to thank Ellen Katz and Bill Valley for convening these local discussions. I mean, 4 broadband events to help educate local folks, give them ideas, inspiration. This is part of the reason that we're seeing such success in Maine, is because of the communication across the state among service providers, local governments, and that sort of thing. So it's really unique. We don't see many states in which we see people that are taking that effort to bring communities together and to have these kinds of forums. So I want to honor that. I wanted to note that New Hampshire is very frustrating to me as someone who likes to see local governments having power. One thing they did that was really great is that they did not specify how you have to demonstrate the 25.3, which you correctly noted is frustrating for some. On the other hand, New Hampshire could have said, as defined by the very flawed federal statistics. They did not say that. They left it open. And there are interesting technical ways using math and geography in which one can demonstrate what kind of access at a minimum is available. There's a paper from the Blandin Foundation called The Impact of CAF2 Networks that demonstrates some of this, and it's actually quite sharp. It looks like I'll be having a conversation with Fletcher about this later. So anyway, I think there's been a lot of takeaways today. We're going to end a couple of minutes early, but please join me in giving a hand to this panel.